From WBUR Boston and NPR, I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. Scientists know a lot about how trees communicate, but few know how to get it across like German forester Peter Wohlleben. He spent years in the woods and in the research. Now he's telling the story of what goes on with the trees. A lot, he says. They're social. This hour on Point, the hidden life of trees. Talking, smelling, counting, learning, remembering. Here from Dr. Seuss's Lorax film from 1972. The Lorax fights to protect the forest from the Onceler. Here's the Lorax introducing himself while the Onceler cuts down the trees around him.
I speak for the trees. Let them grow. Let them grow. But nobody listens too much, don't you know? I speak for the trees, and I'll yell and I'll shout for the fine things on earth that are on their way out.
Well, yes, many have been harvested. So much of our built environment is made of wood, especially in the United States. We've cut down enormous forests here. Joining me now from Salford, England, is Peter Wohlleben. He spent over 20 years working for the Forestry Commission in Germany and now runs an environmentally friendly woodland just outside Cologne. His book is The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate, Discoveries from a Secret World. It's made him a sensation in Germany, a kind of tree whisperer. When we walk through the forest, if we're not thinking about it, what are we missing?
A lot. It's like you're walking through an elephant herd and see just biorobotics and not the wonderful beings that they are.
You began your career in the forestry industry, finding trees in the woods to cut down and send off to be turned into lumber, spruce and beech and oak and pine. You became disenchanted with that work and came to a deeper interest in trees. Tell us about that.
As a forester, I knew about trees as much as a butcher about animals. And yeah, that's what a forester is, a tree butcher.
A tree butcher.
As a little child, I always wanted to be a nature protector. I know now that that is not a profession, but deep in my heart, when I finished my study of forestry, I realized that I destroy forests by treating them like the conventional forest industry does.
You write about trees being very social. You talk about them in kind of human terms. Talking, feeling, suckling their young, and more. What do you mean, trees talking to one another?
I translate the scientific terms. The research that have been done since 40 or 50 years is really amazing, but no one realizes it because the scientific speech is so dry, so full of technical terms that no one wants to read it. And I translated it. I made my own discoveries. For example, one day I stumbled over a moss-covered stone, and after bending down, I realized that this was the remnant of a very old stump, which the tree has been felled 400 or 500 years ago, and this stump was still living. And how could that be without any green leaf? And the only explanation was that this old fellow was supported by its neighbors via root connections, and they are pumping sugar solution to this old guy. And that was the first point where I realized trees are social beings. They don't fight against each other for light and for water and for whatsoever, what we are all told, but they are a big family which support each other.
You're suggesting there that the trees around this 400 or 500-year-old stump were actively keeping it alive?
Yeah, the reason is a single tree is not a forest. And just as a forest, they can cool down, they can bring the temperature down about 3 degrees in comparison to a managed forest. They have more humid climate, which they like, and within they are more tough. And single trees suffer when they are lonely. They seem to be healthy. When we look at them, they seem to be fit because they grow so fast. But in reality, those lonely trees won't be very old. And so within a forest, trees can be as old as 10,000 years.
Healthier and longer-lived when they're together in that way. What are the things that trees do together that they might or don't do when they're on their own?
Trees have several ways to communicate, like we have. There's a chemical way with dances. So, for example, when a tree is attacked by an insect, it feels the pain and it reacts with electrical signals and then with pumping poisonous substances in the bark and in the leaves, and warns also the surrounding neighbors so that they can prepare in time. And when a tree is lonely and he's not able to recognize anything, it is attacked, and the time to react is too short for a tree. Trees are very very, very slow beings.
How do they communicate to trees around them? Watch out.
They do that via the root network. They are connected with their roots, and there they send out chemical and electrical signals like our nerve system. But the roots are not reaching every member of the community, and therefore there's a fungi network. There are thin filaments growing through the soil, and those fungi bring the electrical communication to the next trees or trees which are much far away, so every member of the society knows what's going on in the forest.
So there's even more than the tree life at work here, the life surrounding the trees. And we've got callers for you already, Detroit, Michigan.
From what I understand, mycelia networks are some of the largest organisms on the planet. And underneath trees, they do communicate, share information, and nourishment, chemicals, and food.
Peter Wohlleben, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a kind of fungus, and it's not just me who studies things like that. There's strong research being done in the last decades about this, but it's not known to the public because it reads very hard. Fungus is not able to feed itself, so it has to get food from other beings, for example from trees. And for getting something, you have to pay something, like among humans. And the fungi bring news to other trees, and therefore it receives sugar solution. It's up to 1/3 of the whole photosynthesis that a tree makes. It has to pay for those news.
And so there's a kind of mutually beneficial relationship here.
Right.
What you call the families of trees. When you say a family, do you mean just a whole forest, or do you mean something more discrete?
No, it's something more discrete. It's, for example, mother trees. They are together with their child, and that seems too human in expression, but that's a new research being done on the University of British Columbia. Mother trees, they are able to know which seedling is their own, and then they connect, especially with those seedlings, with their own kids, let's say like this, and they even have more beloved kids than others, favorites.
Do they give special nurturing or nourishment to those trees?
Right, and less beloved childs will get less. For example, when they are on a ground which is stony and they don't have any chance to grow up, then they are not supported like child or seedlings, which grows in better conditions. So the mother tree is able to make decisions.
The time scale of the life of trees is very often quite different from the human time scale. If we saw all of this activity speeded up to our pace of living, would we recognize more clearly what's going on with trees, Peter?
Yeah, I think so. For example, electronical signal within our nerve system will travel within milliseconds for 1 meter. And when you say see a tree needs minutes for 1 centimeter for electrical signal. So trees are very, very slow. That's perhaps the reason why they have to get so old, because they react very slow and all things are going on very slow. And so we don't have to admire trees for getting so old, because their whole lifespan is completely slowness.
Do you think all this amounts to intelligence?
For the moment, it's just a guess, and we don't know even where a tree stores its memories, because a tree has not a central nerve system like ours. So talking about intelligence would go too far in the moment. But trees have memories, trees even can count, trees are able to learn, and even are able to pass their memories to other trees.
We attribute all kinds of characteristics to trees, but a lot of science as well. Just this last summer, here's Susan Simard, she's professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia, gave a TED Talk in Canada about how she tested her theories of how trees communicate with one another. She used radioactive carbon to measure the flow and sharing of carbon between individual trees, and here she is explaining the first time she heard trees talk to one another.
I went over to the fir tree. I pulled off its bag. I ran the Geiger counter up its needles, and I heard the most beautiful sound. It was the sound of Birch talking to Fir. And Birch was saying, "Hey, can I help you?" And Fir was saying, "Yeah. Can you send me some of your carbon? Because somebody threw a shade cloth over me."
As a scientist going at it, Peter Wohlleben has been in the forest for most of his life, and he says, yes, they're talking out there. Peter, do trees communicate between species? It's what Suzanne seems to be indicating there.
That's not absolutely clear in the moment. It may be also that the fungi network is doing things the trees perhaps don't like. For example, when beech trees want to support each other, the fungi network brings a little sugar to other species, because fungi needs trees to survive, and when a disease will bring the beech trees to die out, so the fungi network needs a plan B to rely on, and that may be oaks, and therefore that may be one reason why other species are supported. But that's just a guess. I think that scientists are not discovered that so far.
It's an interesting range of responses to the way you characterize trees. Steve writes to us on Facebook, didn't you see Avatar? Where, of course, they got the Tree of Souls. Of course they talk. And he writes, they talk more if you're on acid. But Chris says, absolutely, the forest speaks through the mycelium. They use these networks to share nutrients and chemicals. We have so much to learn about what communication really means. And Longfeather writes to us, I'm thinking about all the old live oaks I've sat under, or whose branches I've napped on, always feeling safe and held. Can never remember being part of or overhearing an irritable conversation under the live oaks at the beach where my mother used to take us, or where I go to smell the surf. They're like a chapel that lets you feel calm. That almost indicates, and a lot of people I think may have felt this at one time or another, something like communication between trees and humans.
That may be true. Trees are able to communicate with animals. For example, when an elm tree is bitten by a certain caterpillar, it tastes which sort of caterpillar this is because of the special saliva, and may call their predators that are little wasps which flies to the elm and lay their eggs into the caterpillars, and so the elm gets rid of those little worms.
So the tree calls a wasp which comes to eat the worm, the caterpillar.
Right. Yeah, and I think in former times our ancestors used to live in woods, and just healthy wood is a good place to be. Wood which is weak, which is unhealthy, may be destroyed within a storm, and that's a dangerous place to live. And I think we have senses to know whether a forest is in good condition or not, and the trees are communicating, especially when they are in danger, when they are suffering from a heavy drought or attacked by insects. And so I think we have some senses to smell it, and there's a strong research being done in Japan and Korea that, for example, in forests which are in a good condition, your blood pressure is thinking, your heartbeat is going down, and your body system is completely going to a better condition.
Bill in Oklahoma City.
Guten Tag, mein Herren. I'm a certified arborist for about 30 years now. How do trees communicate as a response to pruning, removing live branches, surgery?
Trees may respond to it. For example, there's brand new research being done on deers which are biting branches. I think it's nearly a similar thing. They can find out which sort of animal is biting the branches and then bring in a special acid to avoid this. I think they are not used to humans to cut branches, because doing this is, I think, just some 100 years or maybe some 1,000 years old. That means just a few tree generations, so that the trees are not able to evolve in this.
You mean widespread pruning? I suppose if you go back far enough in human history, that we didn't bother to give trees haircuts.
Right. And therefore, the trees don't have any strategy against humans going to cut branches, but I think they feel it, they feel the pain, and they react, and one can measure that. And therefore, the best time to cut trees, whenever one will do this, is in summertime when trees are awake, because in winter, when they are sleeping, they are not able to react.
Bill, what other questions have you got? You're our degreed arborist.
What species are more communicative?
I think most of the trees which live in big forests are communicative, but some trees, for example, like willows or birch, they are very often loners, like lone wolves, and they are used to live on their own. And maybe, but the research is still at the beginning, maybe there's not so much communication among them because they are used to live on their own.
Bill, what have you learned from your direct observation as an arborist there in Oklahoma?
Well, in my studies, I have learned that they communicate through pheromones, scents, and chemicals. I hearken back to that book back in, I think it was in 1974, was written Secret Life of Plants. Are you familiar with that book, sir?
Yeah, just a little, yeah.
Apart from falling out of a tree, as an arborist who's with trees all the time, I mean, the Secret Life of Plants is suggested that humans might even communicate with plants. Do you feel that with trees, Bill?
I talk to trees all the time, and I don't know that I get a word back from them, but I'm hoping that they can hear me, kind of like you might speak to a person that can't talk, you know. They hear you, but they can't communicate with words back to you.
Yeah. I know that feeling of communicating. Back on the farm in Illinois, I've got a gnarly, giant old sycamore I think of as sort of a spirit tree. I feel very related to that tree, very tied since childhood to that tree. Is that just poetic, romantic fancy?
I would be careful to judge this, but I think trees are too slow for communicating with us. Because when you remember the slow traveling electrical signals, I think you have to talk days after days to a tree to just let the tree can understand one word. It's too slow for us. I think to make a comparison, trees and humans are like flies and humans. Flies are too fast for us and make zzz, and you even can't catch it. And for a tree, we are like a fly. We go to the tree and in the next moment we are away. Or if you want to hug a tree, I think we have to hug it for days so that the tree might recognize that you are there. It may be a connection, don't want to judge it, because we know that trees are interacting with animals and we are a sort of an animal, so why not? But it takes time. We have to calm down, and I think that's a good idea to rest under a tree, to stay under a tree, and perhaps something wonderful happen.
Chris in Wallingford, Connecticut.
We live in an age of so many negative tendencies. I'm curious if we can see or learn from something like that in trees. Do they decide what information they relay to other trees when they communicate with other species, or other trees within their same species? Are they selective with what they'll communicate?
Bias or prejudice or selective assistance between trees of different stripes.
Trees differ between friends and not friends and family members and non-family members, but in general they are all working together and they are very social without thinking to themselves by supporting other trees. There are no racists or racism among trees. What we all sometimes think is when, for example, beech trees harass oak trees, but oak trees are as far away from beech trees like humans and goldfish, for example. But different races of beech trees, for example, I think they will cooperate. And for a tree, it's more important to save the forest than to save itself.
Did you say that beech trees harass oak trees?
Yeah.
How? Why?
I see it very often because beech trees, maybe they don't take care about other species because they want to take their water, their light. Therefore, they grow with the roots under the roots of oak trees. They grow with their branches through the crown of an oak tree. They switch off their light. They take their water, and the oak tree will starve to death. And that takes decades, and you will see the oak tree panic, get fear. And then it builds little branches that are called in a technical term fear branches. That's long known to foresters. When you see this, you know this oak gets panic and this oak will die within the next decade. The beech tree is, in the moment, the strongest tree in Middle Europe, and perhaps within the next 100 years, the oak trees will gain the territory. We don't know that. Trees are very slow. The beech trees are still coming back from the last ice age to the north. In the moment, they have reached southern Scandinavia, southern Sweden, and if we let them go far north, I think within the next 100 years, they will be in middle Sweden and afterwards in northern Sweden, and will be followed by the oak in the same time that it gets warmer now because of climate change. Though it's a fluent thing, and I don't want to judge the beech trees, I don't want to judge the oak trees, but I just watch them, what they are doing, and they are doing it very, very slow.
Beech trees slowly on the march. Mike in Boston.
I often look at the trees and the way they touch, and I'd like to know what your caller thinks about plants being aggressive. Now, I have cucumber plants. They have these crazy little feelers, and next to my cucumbers are tomatoes. And I noticed I can't move my tomatoes, and they stop growing because the cucumber feelers have latched on to the tomato plants.
That may occur, yeah, that they even touch with branches, but that's not good for the trees, because when the wind goes through the trees and they will be shaken by the wind, their branch will be damaged of both trees. So usually they take distance. There are trees which wipe off their neighbors, like birch trees, for example. The branches hang down and they wipe their neighbors so that the crown of the neighbors will be destroyed. Yeah, that happens.
We've got a little tree music for you here. German artist and engineer Bartholomaus Traubeck created a record player that creates music by playing the rings of a tree. This is his years. I don't know what a tree would think about that or feel about that. Peter Wohlleben is with us. He is author of the new book, The Hidden Life of Trees, what they feel, how they communicate, discoveries from a secret world. He says they have memory, they count, they learn, they pass on memories. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. Talking about the secret life of trees, how they share, coordinate, communicate all around us. Josh writes to us on Twitter after listening to you, Peter. He says, all these years I spent hugging trees, I never considered that they would want to hug back. Dawn is calling from Staunton, Virginia.
This is an interesting topic. I just experienced the demise of lots of trees from beavers. I live next to a stream, it's a creek actually, and I have just discovered a beaver dam with hundreds of trees fell to make this dam. My question is, Do you let Mother Nature take its course or save the tree's life, eliminate a rodent that's very destructive?
In this case, beavers. How do you look at that one?
I would let nature do its thing. I have a coffee cup from the United States and there's written, save a tree, eat a beaver. But when we leave the forest and the woodlands on their own, then it's not so important if a beaver fells some trees. A beaver may be important for the forest because it regulates the water flows. So more water will stay in the special region where a beaver lives. So a beaver is important for the forest, but for the single trees which are felled by the beaver, that's hard when the life is over. But for the whole forest, a beaver can be very good. So therefore, I would let Mother Nature do its things. And from this example, we see that the reservations that we need for forests has to be big enough so that there are maybe single spots where a beaver lives and perhaps even destroy a little of the forest.
You speak of trees having memory. What do you mean by that?
For example, when trees suffer of a heavy drought, then the wood cracks and that hurts a tree. And as we learn best, even if it's not nice, when we feel pain, we don't want to feel this pain again and avoid things which causes this pain. And the tree has the same strategy. He has in the soil under his roots plenty of water from wintertime saved in the soil. And in springtime, he can consume it. For example, a big beech tree may need as much as 500 liters per day. But when such a beech tree suffered from a heavy drought, it will change its water management the years after and save more water for a maybe dry summer and remembers that for its whole lifespan.
You talk about trees counting. What do you mean by that?
That's a discovery from the University of Bochum in Germany. They researched apple trees, and every spring apple trees need to build new leaves, and the tree don't know whether it will be late frost or not, and the late frost will destroy the new leaves, so the tree has to rebuild it again. And therefore the tree counts the warm days, and just when a certain amount of warm days is reached, it will come out with its new leaves. And that causes two things. A tree has to count for this, and it has to have a memory, because otherwise it would count every day one.
You talked about passing on memory, passed on to subsequent generations, or how?
Right. A mother tree may pass its memory, its experience to other trees, to the younger generation, so that it doesn't need to learn every lesson by itself. Therefore, maybe that is the reason why this old stump is supported by the trees surrounding it, because the stump is at least twice or 3 times as old as the trees surrounding it and has perhaps 2 or 3 times more memories than the younger trees, and therefore it's valuable for the community.
What's the change in our thinking that you would like to prompt?
I would like people to look at trees like to look on elephants. When we look on trees nowadays, we think, they are oxygen producer, they are timber producer, they are water purifier. They are just there to serve us. But what do we think when we look at an elephant? An elephant is a beautiful animal, and no one thinks what benefits it will bring for us. And I want to change the look on trees like plant elephants. And I think every one of us has the next tree not far away than 200 or 300 meters, and therefore everyone can enjoy trees.
A listener writes to us on Twitter, how do forests recover from clear cuts and harvesting? Most of New England was cleared at one time. Forests in much of this country cleared, and in Germany too, for that matter, in very large part. What's the consequence?
The consequence is the recovery needs 500 years. That's just one tree generation. Seeing it from the tree side, it's very fast. Seeing it from the human side, it takes a lot of time to recover, but there is hope that it will work. But we need to leave the trees alone, and that's the most important thing. We are not used to stand there with our hands in the pockets and do nothing to do anything good. And that is what we have to learn. We have to have time for recover, and we have to step aside.
You raised some concerns about the way forests are replanted these days. When we have commercial forests,
planted forests are no forests. Before planting, usually the roots will be cut, that the tree can be easily planted, because the root system will be cut to a smaller size. And when you cut roots, the brain-like structures on the root tips is also cutted away. And
the brain-like structures.
Okay, brain-like structures. Yeah, that is the zone where trees may contact with each other and find out who is relatives and who are not. And when you cut it away, it will be rebuilt, but not with a fully function. Therefore, those trees are for the whole lifetime disabled. They won't become very old, and they won't build up those wonderful societies. And therefore, it's important that we grew a new forest out of seeds and not out of plants.
But I've seen whole, for example, apple orchards in Germany, which were unbelievably manicured. It looked like lines of soldiers. The branches just up as if hands up, don't shoot. Deeply, deeply disciplined into a certain productive order. What about that?
Yeah, that's just for the forest industry, and that is okay. For example, when you eat your bread in the morning at the place where the wheat grows, usually in former time there was a primeval forest. But we are humans, we have certain rights. We may take something out of nature, and that may be also timber. But when we want to do something good for nature, then we have to leave our hands in our pocket and say, okay, this place is for nature, there we don't take anything out. The other places are reserved for our needs, and that's also okay, and so we have to get it in a good balance. And that is the point which concerns me at the moment.
Louise in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
As I'm listening, I receive a passionate case for ecosystem preservation, and it begs the question, what are the effects of pesticides and, for instance, cell phone electromagnetic frequencies on trees?
The electromagnetic frequencies are not so well researched in the moment. Insecticides are well researched. They destroy the whole community. For example, the old beech forest I'm responsible of. When we look in the forest, we have more than 10,000 animal species living in the ground. And when you use pesticides, you will kill them all. And electromagnetic waves will cause damage, but we don't know how much and which sort of damage. Because trees are like us, working with electrical signals within their bodies, and so it must disturb in any way this communication, but we don't know how so far.
Let's go to Denver, Colorado. Teresa.
I'm not a researcher, but I have just started a couple of years ago doing some pilot research on the healing effects of the music that plant plays. So I have a biofeedback system that has been adapted to measure the electrical resistance of vegetable tissue. And when it's connected to a plant, it takes the signal that the plant is emitting and then translates that into sound via a synthesizer, actually giving the plant a voice. The plant becomes the musician and the biofeedback system becomes the instrument. And through listening to trees and other plants play music, I had a curiosity about what kind of effect would it have on the body and the mind if someone listened to that music. So I did several pilot studies a few years ago that show the immune system gets stronger when we listen to trees and plants play music, and that our body goes through this detoxification process, as well as several other things that happen.
Teresa hooks up her gizmo and suddenly she's got plant music, tree music. Peter, where do you go with that?
I didn't heard that music so far, but yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'm still a forester, and I've learned a lot of things. It's like always in scientific life, you answer one question and you get 10 new ones, and therefore I'm always happy to get new things to know, like the music of plants. That sounds really great. I think I have to research it in the internet, but so far I don't have any knowledge about this. The latest research from Australia says that plants, and therefore even trees, may communicate even with sounds. Wheat roots make click sounds within a frequency of 220 hertz, and the roots of the other plants will grow in this direction. So there has to be any communication, but that's a very first step in research.
You're managing a beech wood forest. Traditional harvesting techniques are not used. You are promoting cutting and just bringing horses in to take them out.
I don't first step thing and what benefits it will bring in form of money, but for the little village where I am responsible, it brings a lot more money because a healthier forest grows more and better wood quality, and therefore it's really better for profit to use horses instead of big harvesting machines.
Why? Because the trees are happier? Because they don't hear trucks driving through, or what?
When you drive with a truck over forest soil, it will be compressed and never will recover. For example, it may save less water from wintertime. The roots can't go in because there's no oxygen left, and the soil won't recover from those damages from machinery just after the next ice age. And seen from the human view, such wooden soils are destroyed forever, and I don't want to be responsible for such a destruction, and therefore I use horses.
Peter Wohlleben, author of the book The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate, Discoveries from a Secret World, a bestseller in Germany, now being read all over the world. Behind us right here, Redwood Tree by Van Morrison. This is On Point.
For a redwood tree.